Well, I was trained for the real world, not at QUT, it was harder than that. And most of the real worlds I was trained for at one point or another ceased to exist when I was young. So at some point, I gave up a narrow advantage in interface design and decided to study the humanities. And I did that because I've always believed the most fundamental challenges of our times are essentially human dilemmas. And these are challenges that require human advances. I mean, not least, we live in an era of unprecedented interaction, what I've called undue complexity, that emerges out of digital technologies and is shaped and remade by digital technologies. This is a socio-technical interface, if you like, or rather a place we're in, that calls for a rich interpretive understanding. And especially so, I think, of the digital societies that are emerging across the globe. So that's what this book was all about. This was one of the first, this book came out of what was one of the first courses in digital sociology in the UK. 10 years on, many of the questions that it attempts to pose about the dynamics of social media, about political populism, consumer agency, narcissism, automation, precarity, data aggregation, weaponization, have become central concerns for all of us, I think. And so the global scale of the digital economy, of personal interaction, of knowledge and aspiration, and also of hysteria and hate, as we're often reminded, they all serve to illustrate that we don't live in a universal order of Californian futurism. Instead, we live in a messier world of digital cultures. So the obvious drawback of this book, as it says in its own introduction, is the persistence of this singular fiction of a globalized digital experience, which we assume, or where we assume that cultures and societies can be traversed through a series of algorithmic adjustments. Now, even worse than the failure to address the particular situation of digital cultures is the failure to address the interaction between societies and cultures in the digital domain. And culture, linking as it does the exchange of knowledge, the production of meaning, the shaping of the social, has to be front and centre in any understanding of the past and the future. So while C. Wright Mills, of course, emphasised the role of social imagination in allowing individuals to situate themselves within larger economic structures, my focus has always been upon the role of the social imagination in allowing us to situate ourselves within a world of cultures. Which is what this book was all about. And here, I mean, this was built upon 15 years of more detailed ethnographic research in many places. But what it's about is the ways in which media reception across culture, across space and across time shapes our understanding of the world we live in and how it shapes our actions at every scale. In emphasising scale here, I'm talking about the subjective relationships between the interpersonal and the familial experience of the transnational and the larger cultural tectonics that emerge from the geopolitical geography of culture. So if you like, cultural studies, big C and small c. Tragedies that we've seen unfold recently, of course, happen at a very personal level and ripple out across the world. They also engage with those larger kind of cultural forces. Now, where I've dealt perhaps most substantially with one particular piece of this puzzle that I'm talking about since the early 1990s has been in India. Now, much of my early work there was visual ethnography and aesthetics, expanding over time to deal with history, social anthropology, communication, geography, economics. And over those years, I've had the great privilege of working with my Indian colleagues across the major regions of the country and on most aspects of the rapid and transformative expansion of media systems. So my first book on India was focused upon transformations in public leisure and urban form. The second on the politics and history of mass communication. And from there, I began to work with an expanding network of collaborators, both across India but also internationally, on the formalisation and integration of a media economy, something that came out of the informal domain of the bazaar and was corporatised, digitised and built into a centrepiece of a new India, a development that was central to India's ambition in the current era. Now, about half of that network, some 17 scholars, contributed to the 2-volume collection that launched our OUP series, Media Dynamics in South Asia, which was the first media series they ever carried. And our collective ambition there is to understand the ways in which cultural resources are being disembedded from the social and then re-embedded in new commodity forms, in new social relationships and in new everyday practices. And so we attempt to offer a rubric for a more comprehensive approach to the media economy. And there's some great stuff that comes through here as we trace money markets through dubious places, as we look at regulations and their violations in everyday space, as we look at the kind of ritual nature of exchange. And that's the work that's provided the necessary foundation for the Spark collaboration with the IITs that I'm doing over this year and next. But overall, we can see the tendencies of the media economy, which we explore here, are converging in the full-blooded pursuit of a digital society of 1 billion people. So again, scale. Now, most recently, I've been writing on the transactional logics of the digital domain, where the unitisation of sociability, of popularity and everyday speech are creating novel forms of social currency that interact with novel forms of digital money. And there are two kind of central propositions, I suppose, in that work. First, which is that the converging interests of finance and information technology are building a kind of transactional layer over and above the distribution and communication layers of internet. That's where the action is happening. But more broadly, that overall system rests upon simultaneous interactions between a large series of social, cultural, political and economic transactions. And this happens simultaneously on a massive scale. So to put those propositions into context, I like to pick a big target always. I've been trying to investigate and illustrate the lived experience of this, a kind of great integration across a digital Asia that now constitutes the majority of mobile and internet activity in the world. And here again, I've been collaborating with colleagues across the region in developing an approach, starting with a whole series of conferences and symposia in Australia, India, the Philippines and Malaysia, as Anna said, from which this first volume is drawn. It's only been out a week or so. But across all of that work, my premise is that the interpretive capacity of the humanities is central to any understanding of the digital futures that are being shaped in the here and now. They're central to understanding our place and other places within the evolving scheme of things. That's where the toolkit of the humanities, more broadly, of cultural studies specifically, I think, has to inform our approaches to the global challenges that we all talk about. Because you can engineer the future, but the larger point is to understand it first.